Hey guys, tonight we begin with something quiet, something ancient, and something that will make your heated blanket feel very smug about existing. Dim the lights, loosen your shoulders, let your room become the cave it was never asked to be, because we're drifting back into a world where the neighbors were Neanderthals, and they were better at most things than you'd like to admit. So, imagine a valley, not the Instagram kind. No pastel skies, no inspirational captions. This valley is cold, damp in a way that disrespects socks, and filled with noises your brain doesn't have files for. The wind drags itself through branches like a tired janitor. A raven coughs out commentary from a crooked pine, and somewhere, heavy footsteps press into mud that freezes overnight. You, stepping into this scene with your modern opinions about hydration, would not last very long. Neanderthals, on the other hand, were perfectly at home here. Shorter, stockier, built like refrigerators that could swing an axe. They had bones like reinforced beams and lungs that worked like bellows in a forge. They burned calories the way you burn phone battery on airplane mode, which is to say, constantly. And while you're worrying about whether your down jacket is ethically sourced, they're wrapping themselves in hides that still remember the animal's personality, sewn together with sinew and bone needles sharper than your excuses. Their day starts early, not because they're morning people, but because dawn is less cold than midnight and more polite than evening. Fire, always fire, coaxed from embers carried carefully like VIP guests in a pouch. If you try this, you'll give up after 3 minutes and Google easiest way to make fire, which is unfortunate because Wi-Fi hasn't been invented yet. Neanderthals just strike stone on stone, showering sparks into dry moss, breathing steadily until the world lights up like it remembered its job. Breakfast is not avocado toast. It's whatever could be hunted, gathered, or traded with another band that tolerated your face. Roasted marrow bones, scraps of dried meat, maybe a handful of berries if the season wasn't in a mood. They chewed on tough fibers like champions, jaws built to handle things that would send your dentist into early retirement. You, on the other hand, would probably chip a tooth and then spend the rest of the day sulking about it. And the valley itself. Let's talk about neighbors. Cave lions, bigger than modern lions, pacing the ridges like they owned the lease. Woolly rhinos snorting steam into the air, basically prehistoric tanks with mood swings. Cave bears, enormous and only mildly interested in your survival. You would see one paw print in the mud and immediately start writing your will. Neanderthals? They just noted it, adjusted their plans, and sharpened the spears. They weren't stupid, by the way. Forget that old cartoon where they grunt and drag clubs. These were people who buried their dead, painted caves, and made tools that wouldn't look out of place in a minimalist design shop if you ignored the mammoth fat smeared on the handle. Their spears were weighted for throwing, their scrapers were ergonomic, and their shelters were windproof in ways your camping tent only pretends to be. If you showed up here with your modern fitness tracker, it would weep. Neanderthals walked miles daily, over ridges, through snowdrifts, carrying meat, wood, or children like it was no big deal. You'd be gasping like a broken accordion while they stopped to casually braid cordage or nap a new flake of flint for fun. And socially, it wasn't just everyone grunting around a fire. They had families, groups, bands that looked after each other. Grandparents mattered. Children were taught by everyone. And survival wasn't about lone wolf heroics. It was about boring, reliable teamwork. If you tried to impress them with your independence, they'd probably just hand you a rock and say, "Good luck, dinner's that way." Now, as the valley's shadows stretch longer, you realize this isn't a theme park. There's no safety rail, no gift shop at the end. The wind gets colder, the animals hungrier, and the fire is not optional. It's the thin, glowing thread between existence and a frozen headline. Neanderthals knew that instinctively. You would still be wondering if your sleeping bag was rated correctly. Spoiler, it wasn't. And so, before the stars blink awake, before the hyenas start their nighttime gossip, you start to understand. You wouldn't last a day here, not because the world hated you, but because you were designed for thermostats, microwaves, and ergonomic chairs. Neanderthals were designed for valleys like this, and they knew how to make it boring enough to survive. Breathe. Relax, because we're only visiting, and you get to leave before the mammoth herd strolls through the marsh like it owns the place. So, the sun has dragged itself up, not dramatically, just a pale, reluctant disk. The kind of sunrise that feels more like paperwork than art. And in the Neanderthal Valley, life resumes with the kind of steady rhythm you find in people who don't have the luxury of procrastination. They don't start the day with yoga and emails. They start the day with sticks, flint, and making sure no predator decided to claim their sleeping spot during the night. You, of course, would wake up complaining about your back, because the ground is not memory foam, and rocks don't care about your lumbar support. Meanwhile, a Neanderthal simply rolls their shoulders, shrugs off the stiffness, and gets on with sharpening tools. Let's talk about those tools for a moment. They were not random rocks, no matter what lazy cartoons have taught you. Neanderthals made Mysterian tools. Carefully flaked stone points, scrapers, awls, all designed with intent. A scraper wasn't just sharp. It was sharp at the right angle to clean a hide without shredding it. A point wasn't just pointy. It was balanced for throwing, weighted so it wouldn't tumble like your dignity if you tried to copy them. You, with your multi-tool from Amazon, would break the blade on day one, and they'd stare at you like you just tried to eat the hammer instead of using it. Breakfast is practical, not inspirational. No one's posting berry bowls to Instagram. It's dried meat chewed until it gives up. Marrow sucked from bones because calories are king. And maybe some roots roasted just long enough not to poison anyone. You'd grimace at the taste, but to them, this was comfort food, a reminder that the hunt yesterday worked, and the hunt today needs to happen too. Now, the hunt, this is where you'd fall apart completely. Neanderthals didn't jog politely through the forest. They coordinated. They knew the land better than your phone knows your browsing history. They tracked herds of reindeer, bison, even mammoths if they were ambitious, and the weather had made the ground slippery enough to tilt the odds. They worked together to drive animals into traps or bottlenecks. You would, of course, step on a twig at the wrong time and ruin the whole thing. Congratulations, you're now the weakest link. The only thing you'd contribute is being a convenient distraction for the predators following behind. And predators were always following. Wolves, cave lions, hyenas, the size of your nightmares. The valley is never empty. You don't go for a casual stroll here. You move with purpose, because the moment you look available, something with sharper teeth than you will apply for the position of landlord. Neanderthals kept their eyes up, ears tuned. They read the valley like a newspaper. Paw prints in the mud, broken branches on a path, a faint smell of musk in the breeze. You, meanwhile, would be trying to figure out where the bathroom is, which is everywhere and also nowhere safe. Socially, it's not a sitcom, but it has rhythms. Neanderthal groups were small, maybe 20 to 40 individuals, families bound together by necessity, affection, and the understanding that life was easier if you didn't annoy the person holding the firewood. They cared for the elderly. They helped the injured heal. Archaeologists find bones that healed after breaks. meaning someone took the time to feed and protect the injured long enough for them to recover. You complain when someone doesn't like your post. They shared actual meat to keep each other alive. And communication. They weren't just grunting. They had language. Maybe not Shakespeare, but complex enough to organize hunts, pass on stories, and gossip about who messed up at the fire last night. They likely sang too. Simple songs, repetitive, soothing in a way that kept rhythm during work. You'd try to hum along and ruin the melody. Neanderthals would politely ignore you and go back to braiding cordage. The valley itself changes with the hours. Morning mist pulls back like a curtain, revealing slopes dotted with scraggly trees and wide plains beyond. Herds graze at a distance, always moving, always cautious. Ravens follow them because ravens know dinner is a group project. The air smells of earth, damp hide, and smoke. Not unpleasant, just honest. You'd probably call it too natural and ask for a candle. By midday, tasks are divided without anyone handing out a to-do list. Some gather firewood, breaking dead branches with steady efficiency. Others nap flint into fresh blades, the sharp crack of stone on stone punctuating the silence. A few prepare hides, scraping until they're soft enough to bend into clothing or shelter. Children, smaller, sharper-eyed versions of their parents, help where they can, copying motions, learning through doing. You, watching, would feel useless, which, in fairness, you would be. And then there's the weather. The valley doesn't care about your plans. Rain can sweep in without warning, sleet can turn the ground into soup, winds can flatten your confidence. Neanderthals simply adjusted, pulled hides tighter, shifted camp, carried the fire carefully to a new spot. You, of course, would try to check a forecast and discover that the only app here is the way moss grows on the north side of a tree. As evening settles in again, the valley turns back into its other personality, quiet, dangerous, beautiful in a way that doesn't need your approval. Fires crackle low. Hides block the draft at the cave entrance. Meat roasts slowly, dripping fat onto embers, releasing a smell that even your modern palate would respect. Children curl against mothers, tools are stacked neatly, and stories begin. Not fairy tales, but simple recountings of hunts, weather, ancestors, lessons. The kind of storytelling that's less about plot and more about keeping memory alive. And you, well, by now you'd be curled in a ball, wondering how anyone did this every day without a coffee machine. The answer is simple. They did it because they had to, and they were good at it. You wouldn't last a day in this valley, not because it hated you, but because it required you to be something you've forgotten how to be. The night has folded itself over the valley again, not sharp or sudden, but like a blanket with too many patches. One by one, the stars seep out, the fire pops softly, and you realize this is when survival gets quiet and difficult. For Neanderthals, night isn't free time. It's another shift. Fire must be kept alive, not large, not wasteful, just steady, glowing coals under watchful eyes. The camp arranges itself around it, not in a circle of comfort, but in a ring of responsibility. Everyone knows that warmth is the one contract you don't break. You, of course, would roll over, fall asleep, and let the fire gutter out. Congratulations. Now everyone's freezing because you trusted your alarm clock in a century that doesn't have one. Predators move closer in the dark. Not always seen, but felt. A wolf pack testing the edges of smell. A cave lion padding silently along the ridges. hyenas laughing at a joke only they understand. Neanderthals didn't panic. They prepared, spears within reach, stones stacked, ears tuned to every twig. Their bodies didn't tense. They simply adjusted. The way you shift a blanket in your sleep. You, hearing one growl, would scream and sprint directly into the thing that made the growl, and sleep itself. Let's be honest, you wouldn't get much. You're used to mattresses that forgive you, pillows that support you, climate control that smooths out the night. Here, you sleep in shifts, on hides stretched over dirt, beside bodies that radiate warmth like slow furnaces. Dreams are not entertainment. They're interruptions. Every rustle outside tugs your eyes open. Every gust of wind makes you check the fire. Neanderthals managed, because they always had. You would call it insomnia and complain to customer service. Morning again, and the rhythm repeats. But today is different, because today the hunt must happen. The dried meat is low. Marrow bones are gone. And bellies remind everyone that survival isn't a philosophy. It's logistics. Tracking begins at first light. Neanderthals move like detectives reading a book only they know how to interpret. A bent blade of grass. A clump of dung. Faint prints pressed into mud that's already freezing. They whisper observations with gestures sharper than words. You, standing there, would nod like you understood, while staring at the wrong set of footprints that belong to your own shoes. They spot reindeer on a distant ridge, silhouettes shifting like a tide. The group spreads, silently, efficiently. No one needs a pep talk. Each person knows the role. Drivers, flankers, the one with the strongest arm ready to throw. Spears aren't random sticks. They're weighted missiles honed to fly true. You would throw yours once, miss by a valley, and then limp back to camp pretending it was practice. The chase is not cinematic. It's long, grueling, measured. The reindeer are faster, yes, but Neanderthals play the terrain like chess, driving the herd toward a ravine, into mud, against slopes where speed turns clumsy. And when the moment comes, spears fly, not one, not two, but a storm of stone points, each placed with intent. The animal falls, not gracefully, not instantly, but enough. The valley swallows the sound, and the group rushes in, efficient, calm, the way people act when meat means next week's survival. You, of course, would be crying into your sleeve, whispering about documentaries, while the Neanderthals thank the animal in ways both practical and spiritual. A quick cut, a murmured ritual, a glance skyward, acknowledgement without sentimentality. Because gratitude is efficient too. It keeps the group grounded in respect. You would hashtag it. They just carried the meat home. The butchering begins before the body cools. Flint blades slide through hide. Fat is collected, marrow is scooped, sinew is stripped for cordage. Nothing is wasted. Organs roasted quickly on the spot, eaten warm for strength. Even bones will be cracked later for grease. You would gag because you're By evening, the camp smells like smoke and roasted meat. The fire is bright, hides drying in the shadows, tools clinking in practiced rhythm. Children gnaw on scraps. Elders chew slowly, telling stories between bites. The valley feels for a moment like a room full of relatives who actually like each other. And you, finally fed, would think, maybe, just maybe, you could last another day here. But then the wind shifts. The wolves start again, and the valley politely reminds you, no, you wouldn't. So the fire is still breathing, the valley is still cold, and the people are still alive, which is the only scoreboard that matters out here. Today is not a grand hunt or a dramatic showdown. It is the quieter kind of day, the one made of maintenance, mending, and the boring heroics that never make it into movies. But it's exactly the kind of day that kept Neanderthals here for thousands of years, while you would have quit before lunchtime. Let's start with the hides. Yesterday's reindeer is now a project. The skin must be scraped clean of fat and sinew before it rots, stretched over frames of wood or bone, tightened like a drum. The scraping tool is just a flint flake with the right edge, but in the right hands it becomes an extension of patience. A Neanderthal woman sits cross-legged, pulling the blade toward her in long, steady strokes. Each scrape is a whisper, each curl of fat tossed aside. She is turning dead hide into clothing, shelter, rope, or bedding. You, trying this for 5 minutes, would cut holes in the hide, ruin the tool, and then sulk about how primitive technology is too complicated. Nearby, another person is busy with sinew. They peel strips from tendons, chew them soft, twist them into cords. It looks like fiddling, but it's the infrastructure of life. Cords will tie spear points, lash shelters, string up bundles of food. You, meanwhile, would suggest zip ties, which tragically do not exist, and then you'd try to braid clumsy rope that snaps the first time you use it. Neanderthals, their cords outlasted seasons, and then the children, smaller, quieter echoes of their parents. They copy everything. A boy squats beside his uncle, awkwardly striking stone against stone, trying to catch the rhythm of flint napping. Sparks jump, flakes scatter, his hands clumsy but determined. Another child practices scraping wood smooth, humming tunelessly as she works. No one is teaching in the classroom sense. Learning happens by being there, by watching, by doing. If you dropped your modern kid here with their tablet, they'd cry within an hour and demand Wi-Fi. Neanderthal kids, though, they were already apprentices, carrying knowledge forward with every splinter of stone. Food is never just a meal, it's preservation. A portion of yesterday's hunt is being smoked over low fire, strips of meat hung on sticks, curled like ribbons. The smoke curls around them, coating each fiber, keeping rot away. Fat is rendered down in a crude pot made of bone and clay, dripping into a container lined with hide. Later, this fat will be rubbed on tools, smeared on skin as protection, or burned as fuel. You, staring at it, would mutter gross and reach for a granola bar that doesn't exist yet. The valley itself is not idle either. Birds sweep overhead, scavengers hoping for leftovers. Ravens perch boldly, tilting their heads, cawing as if offering commentary. Wolves lurk at the edges, waiting to see if clumsy humans leave scraps. Neanderthals chase them off with thrown stones, sharp shouts, confident movements. You would panic, wave your arms, and probably trip into the fire. And when tools dull, as they always do, they don't throw them away. They retouch. A scraper is struck at the right angle, flaked again, edge renewed. A spear point chipped, sharpened, rehoused into its wooden shaft with resin and sinew. Recycling. Long before recycling was a word, you, of course, would try once, cut your finger, and decide stone isn't user-friendly. As the day lengthens, the weather changes. Clouds build over the ridges, heavy with threat. Rain begins, first a sprinkle, then a steady curtain. The valley darkens, air heavy with wet earth. Neanderthals shift without drama. The hides at the cave mouth are pulled tighter. Fire is fed with drier wood kept carefully aside, protected like treasure. Children crawl closer to mothers, gnawing bones in silence. You would complain about mold, sniffle at the damp, and wonder why no one invented umbrellas. Evening returns, as it always does, with its shadows and sounds. The meal is smaller tonight, stretched carefully. Everyone eats slowly, chewing until the taste is gone, swallowing the lesson as much as the food. Then stories, always stories. A grandfather describes a hunt from years ago, voice low, words simple, gestures doing half the work. He points toward scars on his arm, toward the ridge outside, toward the firelight. Children listen wide-eyed, adults nod with the rhythm of memory. You, hearing it, would ask questions, miss the meaning, and discover that translation doesn't matter anyway. The story is not for you. When sleep comes, it is not indulgent, it is obligation. Hides pulled over shoulders, bodies pressed close, fire banked again. The night is colder, sharper, wolves bolder. A mother wakes often, checking the fire, checking her children, adjusting stones. A man stirs, rises, listens at the mouth of the cave, hears only the rain dripping off stone. You would toss, groan, and demand a pillow. And so another day slips into the valley's quiet book. A day of no drama, no conquest, just careful survival. The kind of day that made Neanderthals last for hundreds of thousands of years. And you, by now, would be exhausted, sore, hungry, and more than ready to invent civilization just to get a decent nap. The valley has decided to test you again. The rain has cleared, but the air now holds a sharper bite, a warning that winter is leaning in, the way a cat leans before it pounces. The ground crunches underfoot, frost seeping into every crack. You, with your weather app dependency, would say something obvious like, "It feels colder today," while the Neanderthals already know exactly what that means. More work, more planning, and less patience for amateurs. The morning begins with movement, not complaints. Fires coaxed back into flames, hides checked, tools tested. Everyone knows that the cold isn't just unpleasant. It is an accountant tallying mistakes. A hole in your clothing, an ember that dies, a delay in hunting, and the valley will collect the debt in body heat. You, meanwhile, would consider layering 2 sweaters and hoping for the best. Spoiler, sweaters haven't been invented yet. Let's talk about clothing, because this is one of the reasons you wouldn't last here. Neanderthals weren't parading around in cartoon rags. They stitched hides into garments shaped to fit the body, layered for insulation, smoked for waterproofing. They wore tailored trousers long before Paris Fashion Week thought of them. The stitching was done with bone needles, smoothed to a fine point, sinew thread holding every seam. The smoke curing left the clothes resistant to damp and surprisingly soft. You'd turn your nose up at the smell, but that smoky tang was survival perfume. Without it, you'd be frozen within days. Footwear mattered even more. Boots lined with fur, wrapped with leather, tied snugly with cords. Flexible enough to walk in, thick enough to stop frostbite from creeping in like an uninvited guest. Meanwhile, you'd be sloshing through icy mud in sneakers that would betray you within the first mile. By mid-morning, tasks divide again. A group goes out to check traps. These aren't cute snares like in survival shows. They're practical pits, carefully dug, disguised with branches, placed where herds naturally pass. Sometimes they catch nothing, sometimes they catch wolves, and occasionally they catch dinner. Today, luck is moderate. A hare wriggling in a snare, dispatched quickly, bundled in hide. You'd call it a snack. They call it protein, fat, and the ability to survive another day. Another group searches for edible plants, roots, bulbs, nuts buried under frost, bitter greens still clinging to life. They kneel, dig, taste, test, knowledge passed down so no one eats something that sends you into eternal nap time. You would look at the ground and see dirt. That's it. Neanderthals saw calories hidden under every patch of soil. Meanwhile, inside the shelter, another project is underway: resin. They collect sticky black pitch from birch bark, heat it carefully over coals, and shape it into glue. It smells sharp, earthy, faintly sweet. With it, they fix flint points into wooden shafts, reinforce bindings, seal cracks. You'd probably stick your fingers together and panic. They calmly create adhesives strong enough to last through hunts and weather. Prehistoric superglue, thousands of years before office supply stores, and the social rhythm continues. A woman hums softly as she works, a melody without words, just the rise and fall of breath. Others join in quietly, voices layering like smoke, filling the cave with a sound that is less song than warmth. You, trying to hum along, would go off-key and ruin the atmosphere. They would politely ignore you, because ignoring is also a survival tactic. By afternoon, the valley shifts again. Clouds roll in heavy, the air darker, the smell of snow approaching. Everyone moves faster. Firewood is stacked higher, hides pulled tighter, spears kept close. The children are gathered, fussed over, tucked near the warmest corner. You, of course, would still be asking, do we think it's really going to snow, as flakes land on your head? When the snow comes, it doesn't sprinkle, it pours. Thick flakes, fast, heavy, blanketing the valley in white silence. The cave mouth glows with firelight against the storm. Inside, warmth is carefully managed. The fire is fed, but never too much. Wood is precious. Stones heated in the flames are placed near sleeping spots, wrapped in hides to radiate heat. Food is rationed carefully, shared fairly. No one hoards, because hoarding is a luxury only sitcoms can afford. You'd probably sneak a bigger portion, and someone would sigh, already planning to replace you with a more reliable relative. The snow muffles the world. Outside, predators move cautiously, noses low, hungry, listening for weakness. Inside, the Neanderthals speak in low voices, hands busy with endless tasks, mending, shaping, carving, preparing. A spearhead is polished, a hide is softened, a bone needle is drilled from a shard of reindeer antler. You are doing nothing useful except shivering and realizing your teeth chatter louder than their entire conversation. And still, in the middle of this storm, there is calm. A child giggles as smoke curls oddly. An elder tells a story about a hunt long ago, gestures slow and deliberate. The fire pops, sparks drift upward, and the valley, cold, dangerous, merciless, becomes for one quiet moment a home. You, wrapped miserably in your modern insecurities, would still think you might last the night. But the valley knows better. It is patient, it has time, and it is always colder tomorrow. Morning comes slow, not with sunshine, but with the dull glow of snow reflecting what little light the sky can be bothered to provide. The cave mouth is half buried, drifted white stacked like a rude doorman. You'd groan, pull the covers higher, and refuse to leave bed. Neanderthals? They're already up, poking the fire back to life, checking that last night's embers didn't betray them. Fire is not a luxury, it's a coworker, and you don't let coworkers sleep in. Today's work is simple to describe and exhausting to do. Survival in cold so sharp it feels like it could snap your bones if you laugh too loud. Wood is fetched from a stash kept under hides to stay dry. Every stick counts. Fat is added to the fire to make it burn hotter, the flames popping, the smell rich and heavy. The smoke curls low, coating hides, clothing, lungs. You'd cough and wave your hands like you're allergic. They simply breathe it in. Smoke is seasoning, and it keeps bugs away. Breakfast is modest. Yesterday's hare roasted down to scraps, marrow sucked from bones, warmed by the coals until it runs like liquid. Children chew carefully, wiping greasy hands on fur. Adults eat with steady patience, chewing until the taste is gone. No one overeats. Food is too precious. You would whine about variety. They don't need variety. They need calories. The valley itself is unrecognizable. Every rock and tree softened, blurred by thick snow. The air bites hard and silence presses against the ears. Even the wolves keep their distance, paws sinking deep, bellies empty. A raven passes overhead, black wings cutting through white. Its call echoes like a reminder. Life is still moving even when it feels paused. Inside, tasks shift toward winter's quiet industry. A man sits cross-legged with a piece of bone, shaping it slowly into a needle. He grinds the point against stone, bores a hole with careful pressure. Beside him, a woman twists sinew, chewing the strands soft, then rolling them into thread. Another scrapes a hide into supple leather, her motions hypnotic, steady as breathing. You would try one of these tasks, lose patience in 5 minutes, and start asking if anyone has board games. Children play, but their play is education. They stack stones, practice tying knots, mimic spear throws. One boy sneaks near the fire with a dull flake, tapping stone against stone, imitating the rhythm of napping. His mother glances, nods, lets him learn. You'd worry about child safety. They worry about making sure the child grows into someone useful. By midday, someone returns with a small prize, pine branches gathered from a sheltered slope. The resinous wood is precious. It burns hot and smells sharp, brightening the cave with cleaner smoke. A few resin clumps are chewed like gum, sticky, bitter, but useful for cleaning teeth. You, of course, would spit it out immediately and complain about the taste. They chew patiently, understanding that healthy teeth are the difference between eating and starving. Afternoon brings cold that makes the cave walls sweat frost. Outside, the snow falls again, thicker, heavier. The group huddles closer, hides layered, bodies pressed together. It isn't sentimental. It's insulation. Heat pooled and shared. You'd squirm, ask for personal space. Neanderthals didn't need that concept. Space was expensive. Warmth was cheap if you stayed close. And with the storm trapping them inside, stories grow longer. An elder speaks of an ancient valley, wide and green, where game was plentiful and winters kind. He gestures with his hands, shaping hills and rivers in the firelight. Children watch, their eyes reflecting flame, learning geography not from maps, but from memory. Another elder hums low, a song without words, the kind of sound that fills silence without breaking it. You'd ask for lyrics, they'd shrug, meaning doesn't need subtitles. Night closes in again. The fire glows steady, hides rustle as bodies settle. Outside, the snow piles deeper. The valley disappears under winter's thick hand, and you, wrapped in borrowed hides, finally feel yourself drifting off. Not comfortable, not happy, but strangely humbled. For once, you don't argue with the cold, you just let the fire keep score. But the valley, patient as always, knows it's not done with you. Tomorrow there will be more snow, less food, and tasks you can't imagine. And while the Neanderthals continue their quiet choreography of survival, you're still the tourist, barely hanging on. The storm has softened by morning, but the valley is far from merciful. The snow no longer falls thick. It drifts sideways, whipped by winds that slide down the ridges like knives. The air bites with a dry, metallic taste. If you inhaled too sharply, your lungs would sting like cold glass. You'd mutter something about central heating and stay buried in your pile of hides. The Neanderthals? They are already up, shoulders hunched, eyes narrowed, preparing to wrestle with the day as if it were another animal to be tracked and tamed. There is no option to take a day off. The valley doesn't care for your excuses. Fuel must still be gathered, food must still be hunted, children must still be kept alive. And so, even in the hardest cold, the group stirs, divides, assigns tasks. A pair of hunters heft spears and prepare to trudge into white wilderness, their bodies wrapped in smoke-cured hides, their boots stuffed with dried grass for insulation. One woman ties a sling around her waist, a toddler tucked against her chest under layers of fur. She'll gather wood while humming a tune the baby won't remember, but which is older than words. You, faced with this weather, would refuse to leave the cave and probably invent remote work thousands of years ahead of schedule. The hunt is brutal. Snow drifts swallow legs to the knee. Every step is a negotiation with gravity. The hunters move slow, deliberate, conserving energy. They scan the ground for trails, hoof prints pressed faintly in the white, the faint scuff of a herd shifting. They kneel, touch the snow, sniff the wind. One points to a faint brown stain, dung, frozen hard, but still warm enough to say the reindeer were here recently. You would gag and insist you weren't that kind of outdoorsy. They simply nod, shift their spears, and continue. Hours pass in silence, broken only by breath and the crunch of snow. And then, movement. A herd, antlers rising like bare trees against the horizon, their coats heavy with frost. The hunters crouch, gesture. They know this cannot be rushed. Reindeer are fast, cautious, their herds tightly knit. A single mistake, and the animals vanish into the storm. You, meanwhile, would sneeze, alerting the herd before the plan even began. The Neanderthals begin their dance, one circling wide to drive the animals toward a bottleneck, the other creeping low, patient, waiting for the right moment. Spears are raised, breath held. When the herd stumbles into range, muscles tighten, arms launch. The spears fly heavy, their wooden shafts humming, stone points cutting through the cold. One reindeer falters, staggers, collapses. The herd scatters, snow exploding under hooves, but the hunters don't chase. One is enough. They kneel beside the animal, whisper a small acknowledgement, then begin the work. The kill is both sacred and practical. The hide is slit quickly, the warm body steaming in the cold air. Fat, organs, and blood are gathered immediately. These are calories too precious to waste. You would turn away, queasy, muttering about vegetarianism. They, however, know there's no room for preferences when the valley is your landlord. Every part of the animal has rent to pay. By the time they return to camp, the sky is purple, the fire glowing like a star caught in the cave's throat. The others greet them with quiet relief, hands moving quickly to help haul the carcass inside. Children peer wide-eyed, learning without words what meat means, how survival is a community project. An elder takes a flint blade and slices the liver into steaming chunks, passing it to the youngest first. Rich in nutrients, it keeps small bodies strong in winters that don't tolerate weakness. You would decline politely and then faint. The butchering lasts long into the night. Meat is stripped into thin strips for drying, fat carefully rendered in bone pots over the fire, sinew peeled for thread, bones set aside for tools, nothing wasted. Even the stomach lining may become a crude container, tied off with cord, filled with melted snow for storage. You would ask for Tupperware. They would hand you a bladder, and while all this unfolds, the storm outside builds again. The wind howls against the cave mouth, rattling branches tied across the entrance. Predators gather in the dark, smelling blood, pacing the ridges. Wolves, bold with hunger, creep closer. Their howls roll through the valley, echoing like a choir of teeth. Inside, no one panics. Spears are kept at hand, fire stoked higher. Children are tucked deeper into hides. The Neanderthals know the rules. The wolves test, but they respect fire. You would scream, light the wrong branch, and set the cave curtain ablaze. Eventually, the wolves slink away, leaving only tracks in the snow and silence heavy enough to feel. Inside, the group rests, exhaustion settling into bones, warmth slowly seeping back into hands. The firelight flickers across stone walls, painting them with orange ghosts. Someone hums a low song, soothing the restless air. A child stirs, mutters, rolls against their mother. You lie awake, shivering, realizing that even after a successful hunt, the valley offers no peace, only borrowed time. And that is the true cruelty of this place. It is not the predators, or the cold, or even the hunger. It is the relentlessness. Every day, every night, the same demands, the same prices, the same fragile thread of firelight holding back the void. Neanderthals were born into this rhythm, carried it like second nature. You, fragile tourist of comfort, are already fraying, but the valley doesn't care. It never did, and it will keep testing you until you break. The storm finally loosens its grip. The snow softens into a hush instead of a hammer. The valley breathes again. But survival isn't only about hunting and fires. It's also about something quieter, something that kept Neanderthals human, even if history has spent centuries trying to make them look like brutes. Let's talk about their minds. Archaeologists used to say Neanderthals were slow, dull, copies of us that forgot the manual. But the evidence refuses to sit quietly in that box. In caves across Europe, paintings bloom on walls older than your entire civilization. Handprints stenciled in red ochre, dots and shapes pressed into stone, lines traced with care. They were not doodles of boredom. They were marks of meaning, and meaning is dangerous because it means imagination was here first. You, stumbling into the cave, would shine your flashlight on a crimson palm print and say, "Neat." Neanderthals pressed their hands against cold rock, blew pigment over their skin, and left behind a signature that has lasted 30,000 winters. They weren't just surviving, they were insisting they existed. And then the burials. The neat thing about burials is that they don't happen by accident. Someone had to dig the earth, lay a body down, place tools beside it, sprinkle flowers or pigments. It means they cared enough to do paperwork with the dirt. Bones found at Shanidar Cave show pollen grains, suggesting a Neanderthal once lay wrapped in blossoms. Was it ritual or kindness or both? You would argue about definitions. They simply did it because grief has always been older than philosophy. Think of music. They didn't have Spotify, but they had flutes. A vulture bone carved with holes, shaped to make sound when breath passed through. Imagine the firelight flickering, children drowsy, meat smoking on sticks, and a soft melody rising out of hollow bone. The first lullabies, long before Mozart. You would try to play it, wheeze, and hand it back. They would smile, keep playing, and the valley would echo like it was briefly kind. Art was not vanity, it was memory insurance. Shells painted with red ochre, beads strung into necklaces, eagle talons worn like charms. These weren't decorations for Instagram. They were reminders, symbols carried from one body to another, perhaps to say, "I belong," or "I remember," or just, "I am more than hunger." You would scoff at the inefficiency. They would quietly outlive you, and their minds didn't stop at art. They were problem solvers, masterful at technology that looks humble but is genius in context. Fire-making kits carried carefully, resin glued to shafts, stone flaked with intention, tools shaped differently for scraping, piercing, carving. They weren't just banging rocks, they were engineers of necessity. You, with your online shopping cart, would call it primitive. But your phone battery dies after 6 hours. Their scrapers still cut after 30,000 years. But intelligence also showed in how they treated each other. Fossil evidence reveals individuals who lived long after injuries that should have killed them. A man with a withered arm, another missing teeth. They were fed, cared for, carried when necessary. That means compassion was part of their toolkit, not a luxury, but a survival strategy. You would grumble about group projects. They kept each other alive because life was always a group project. And here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. They weren't that different from us. Genetic evidence proves they live on inside you, in fragments of DNA still humming quietly in your body. Hair color, immune systems, even the way you process fat or adapt to altitude, all touched by Neanderthal ancestors. You carry their signatures like a watermark, and most days, you don't even notice. But in the valley, it mattered to paint, to bury, to carve bone into sound, to hold a relative who couldn't walk, to pass knowledge into the hands of a child. These were acts that said survival is not enough. Living must mean something, even when the wind erases your footprints every night. The firelight dims, the valley sighs, and you start to see them differently, not as brutes in fur coats, but as humans who made the same quiet mistake you make every day. They wanted to be remembered. And now, thousands of winters later, they are. The valley is still here, the snow still falls, the fire still breathes, but history is shifting quietly in the background. You would not notice it. You would simply think the wind had changed direction. For Neanderthals, though, the end was beginning. They had survived everything that nature could throw at them. Ice that crept down mountains like a slow invasion. Storms that snapped trees like matchsticks. Predators that weighed as much as small cars but had none of the brakes. They had walked through centuries where survival was not a story, but simply the default setting. And yet, something was changing in the rhythm of the world. For hundreds of thousands of years, the Neanderthals had owned this cold theater. Their short, stocky bodies fit perfectly into the script. Strong arms for hunting, wide chests for breathing thin air, thick bones that absorbed the daily collisions of survival. They had fire in pouches, tools on belts, memory in stories, and above all, they had time. But time is never loyal. Into their valleys came others, humans that looked like them but not quite, Homo sapiens, arriving like distant relatives who showed up uninvited to every dinner. They were leaner, taller, faces tucked under higher foreheads, jaws not pulled forward but tucked back, as if nature had shaved down the blueprints. They spoke more words, perhaps faster, perhaps smoother, and they carried habits that spread like gossip through a crowded village. Neanderthals had always been cautious engineers. They chipped stone into useful shapes, made points for spears, scrapers for hides, awls for stitching. But sapiens arrived with blades that looked like overachievers. Long, thin flakes struck off with precision, sharper than anything the valley had seen before. Tools that were lighter to carry, easier to replace, and versatile enough to shift from skinning an animal to carving a bead. It wasn't that Neanderthals lacked intelligence. They understood their world better than you could ever hope to. They knew which slope the reindeer would cross in autumn, which hollow the aurochs preferred in spring, which cave mouth faced away from the killing wind. They could read tracks in mud the way you scroll through social media, effortlessly, unconsciously. But when sapiens spread their networks wider, connecting valley to valley, cave to cave, idea to idea, Neanderthals suddenly looked local in a world becoming global. Imagine two bands meeting in a forest clearing, a group of Neanderthals, heavy spears balanced in strong arms, hides wrapped tight against the frost. Across from them, sapiens with slimmer frames, stone blades glittering in the light, voices trading quickly back and forth. One group measured silence like gold, the other tossed language like coins. Both groups knew the land, but one was starting to think in maps that stretched beyond the horizon. The valleys grew smaller, not because the earth shrank, but because the competition grew larger. Hunts that had once been steady now became crowded, herds driven in new directions, animals pressured from both sides. A Neanderthal hunt might succeed, but it cost more, required more, left less. Slowly, quietly, the margins of survival thinned, and when survival narrows, even small differences matter. Neanderthals thrived in small bands, close-knit groups of 20, maybe 40. Family meant everything. Knowledge passed hand to hand, face to face. But sapiens built larger webs, alliances between groups, gatherings where songs and stories spread like wildfire. Ideas traveled further than feet. If one valley learned a trick with stone or fire, another valley could hear of it within a season. Neanderthals had memory. Sapiens had distribution, and distribution always wins eventually. Still, it wasn't war. The picture often painted is of conflict, one species clubbing the other into extinction. But the evidence whispers a gentler, stranger ending. Bones tell us that sapiens and Neanderthals met not just with spears, but with children. DNA today hums with their signatures. In your own body, tiny fragments of Neanderthal ancestry still drift quietly through your cells. The color of your hair, the way your immune system shrugs at certain infections, even the way your body burns fat in winter, all touched by them. They didn't vanish completely. They became background music in you. But picture the last winters, a small band huddled in a cave like this one, the fire low, hides patched and repatched, the floor scattered with old bones like punctuation left behind by generations. Outside, the snow falls heavier than ever, muffling the valley into silence. The herds are smaller now, pushed further south, harder to track. Wolves linger longer, hungrier, closer. And the storm winds feel like a landlord inspecting a tenant it already plans to evict. Inside, the group does what they've always done. A woman scrapes hide, her motions steady but slower than they used to be. A man sharpens a spearhead, the stone flaking reluctantly under his hand. Children huddle close, gnawing at scraps, listening to stories they might not live long enough to repeat. It is not drama. It is exhaustion. A rhythm that has lasted for thousands of years, beginning to falter. You would not last a day here now. You would not even last the morning. This is survival stripped to its tightest thread. Every ember guarded like treasure. Every bite of food stretched like a prayer. You would break quickly, complaining about variety, dreaming of heat that comes from switches instead of smoke. They, meanwhile, kept holding on, even when holding on became the hardest part. And yet, they lasted far longer than you imagine. For centuries after sapiens arrived, Neanderthals still survived in their corners, in Gibraltar caves, in Balkan ridges, in pockets of steppe where the cold was cruel but the competition less fierce. They lived beside us for thousands of years, watching as their numbers shrank, their valleys narrowed, their fires flickered smaller. They endured with stubborn patience until finally the line ran out. Was it hunger? Was it weather? Was it absorption into our bloodlines? Probably all of these, layered together like the smoke stains on a cave wall. No single moment, no dramatic battle, just a quiet decline, generation after generation, until one morning, a valley woke up without them. But here's the part that matters. The last Neanderthal to blow pigment onto a cave wall didn't know they were the last. The final child to laugh at the sparks from a fire didn't know they were a final chapter. The last band to huddle against wolves didn't realize the valley was closing its book on them. They just kept surviving, as they always had, until survival itself stopped answering the call. And still, they are not gone. Every time you shiver in winter, every time your lungs ache in thin air, every time your body fights an infection with stubborn resistance, you carry them. Their story is written in you, even if you rarely read it. The valley remembers them. The wind still echoes their footsteps. The caves still hold their paintings. The bones still whisper their routines. And when you walk here now, bundled in modern insulation, clutching GPS and thermos, you are still walking in their shadow. You wouldn't last a day. They lasted hundreds of thousands of years, and that is the quietest, most boring, most devastating irony of all. The fire is low again, coals glowing like tired stars, shadows trembling on the stone walls. Outside, the valley is silent, the kind of silence that presses on the ears like weight. The storm has passed, but the air is heavy with frost, every tree frozen into statues, every rock glazed with ice. The Neanderthals huddle close, shoulders pressed together, hides pulled tighter, the rhythm of breath mixing with the rhythm of flame. By now, the world has begun to turn against them, not out of hatred, not out of cruelty, but out of indifference. New people walk across their hunting grounds, sapiens with faster tongues, sharper blades, and wider networks. The animals move differently now, herds pressured from both sides, migrating faster, scattering further. The Neanderthals watch, adjust, adapt, but each adjustment costs more energy, and each winter the margin grows thinner. Imagine a single band, maybe 20 souls, an elder with scars like written history carved into his body, a mother with 2 children, one still carried against her chest, the other already practicing with a small flint scraper, a handful of hunters, broad-shouldered, arms knotted with muscle from a lifetime of throwing spears. They are strong, they are skilled, they are experienced. But strength, skill, experience, none of these can stop a slow tide from rising. The hunt is no longer certain. They track reindeer across frozen slopes, reading prints half buried in snow, sniffing the air for the faint musk of herds. Hours pass. The wind scours their faces raw. Flakes whip into eyes. The cold stiffens hands until stone blades slip from fingers. At last they see movement, a herd shifting nervously on a ridge. The hunters move in formation, practiced, quiet, patient. Spears are raised, feet crunch softly, but before they can close the gap, the herd bolts, not because of them, but because another band is already there. Not Neanderthals, sapiens. Lean bodies dart across the snow, stone blades flashing, voices rising in sharp coordination. They drive the herd away with noise and speed, strategies Neanderthals never used. The reindeer scatter, and the Neanderthals are left standing in silence, spears heavy, breath clouding in the air. You would rage at the unfairness. They simply lower their weapons, turn back, and walk toward the cave. Food is thinner now, meat shared in smaller pieces, fat stretched across more mouths. The children chew scraps and lick bones. The elders eat little, saving their share for younger stomachs. You would complain of hunger after a single skipped meal. They have been managing hunger as a permanent roommate for generations. Inside the cave, the routines continue. A woman scrapes hide until her hands ache. A man retouches a flint blade, chips flying sharp against stone. A child hums tunelessly while playing with bones, arranging them into little shapes on the floor. It looks ordinary, but it is also extraordinary, because these are the last ordinary nights they will ever have, and still they create. Even in decline, they paint. A hand pressed to the wall, pigment blown across fingers until a red silhouette remains. A line of dots traced along a curve of stone, no explanation offered, none needed. A simple shape scratched with flint, an arc, maybe a symbol, maybe nothing. You would call it art. They might have called it memory. They still bury their dead. A child lost to fever, wrapped in hide, laid carefully in a shallow pit, flowers sprinkled or pigment dusted, as if color could soften the edges of grief. The band gathers, not with wailing, but with silence. Each face turned to the firelight, each heart quietly recording the moment. They do not know they are near the end. They only know they are still human. The winters keep pressing. The storms keep lengthening. The herds keep thinning. The caves grow colder. Imagine the last small groups, huddled in Gibraltar caves, cliffs rising above a restless sea. Outside, waves crash endlessly, salt spray freezing on stone. Inside, the fire flickers weakly, the smell of smoke clinging to every surface. These last Neanderthals endure as long as they can, fishing along the shore, gathering shellfish, eating whatever the sea grudgingly allows. Their tools are simpler now, their numbers too small for experiments, and yet they endure until even endurance becomes too expensive. And then, one day, a fire burns in a cave for the last time, a final handprint pressed against stone, a last story murmured to children who will not pass it on, a last spear thrust into meat that will never again be hunted. The valley does not notice. The wolves still move along the ridges. The snow still falls. The wind still whistles through pine branches. The fire goes out, and the smoke drifts upward, forgotten almost as soon as it fades. The Neanderthals are gone, not vanished entirely, not erased, for in you, right now, they still breathe. A fragment of DNA here, a sliver of memory there, a piece of their survival toolkit lodged in your immune system. Their blood mixed into yours, passed through generations so long you forget the names. You carry them when you shiver in winter, when you breathe thin mountain air, when your skin burns in the sun. They are part of you, even if you rarely remember them, and so you would not last a day in their valley. Not one day. The cold would strip you. The hunger would hollow you. The predators would notice you. The fire would leave you. But they lasted not a day, not a year, not a century. They lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. Their lives measured in hunts and fires, in hides and songs, in children's laughter and elders' silence. They survived storms that would terrify you, winters that would end you, predators that would treat you as a snack. They lived in the margins and made the margins home. And when they finally left, they left not as failures, but as ancestors. The valley is still here, the snow still falls, the fire still breathes. And in the quiet of the night, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear them. The scrape of stone on hide, the crackle of firewood, the whisper of breath in cold air, not ghosts, just echoes. And as you drift to sleep, remember this: you would not last a day, but they lasted long enough to last in you.